I'd like to commence with an acknowledgement of country. I acknowledge the Gadigal and Wangal people of the Eora Nation from whose lands this event is being broadcast today, and pay respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of all the lands where you are joining us from today as well. Feel free to make your own acknowledgement of country in the chat box if you'd like to do that. Our guest today is Phillipa McGuinness. Phillipa is the editor of Openbook, the glossy quarterly magazine of the State Library of New South Wales. A previous book publisher of many award-winning books of non-fiction, she's also the author herself of The Year Everything Changed, 2001, and Skin Deep, the inside story of our outer selves, which were both published by Penguin Random House. Her work has appeared in The Guardian, the Sydney Morning Herald, Griffith Review, Meanjin, the Weekend Australian magazine, the Australian Women's Weekly, and Inside Story. Welcome, Pip.
Thank you very much. Great to be here with you, Sophie, and hi to everyone out there. I can't see most of you.
So Pip, you've had such a fascinating career in the publishing industry, and we'll try to touch on as much as we can. But I thought I would start just by asking you how you first became interested in books and literature. Were you a big reader as a kid?
Yes, I was. I would have to say there've been very few nights, probably in my whole life, like from when I was, who knows, a baby or a toddler, where I haven't read a few pages before I go to sleep.
Mm-hmm.
Let alone during the day. So yeah, I have always been a big reader. I just can't imagine life without reading.
Mm-hmm.
And I do read. I'm not very good at listening to audiobooks. I've given it a red hot go, but it's just not my thing. So, every day I'm reading, one way or another for work and for research and for pleasure.
Mm-hmm. And so did you have a vision of working in the literary world? Is that something that you kind of aspired to when you were growing up?
No. Well, kind of. I really, when I was at school, if someone asked me what I wanted to do when I grew up, I said a journalist. So yeah, that's the literary world. And I was pretty serious about that and applied for a few cadetships when I was doing my honours year. I did a BA with honours. And now I'm quite glad that I didn't get any of them. I got I grew up in Sydney, so I was living in Sydney, and I got pretty close to doing a cadetship with The Age. I was down to the last however many, and I didn't get it, and I'm quite glad about that now. I don't think I would have been a very good journalist.
And so how did you then break into the literary world?
I saw an ad on a notice board of all places in the arts faculty at UNSW for a job as an editorial assistant or a publishing assistant, I think it was, at Cambridge University Press, and applications had closed the day before I was seeing the ad. And I thought, well, that sounds okay. And I rang. There must have been a number, and I rang and asked if I could put in, if it really was too late to put in an application. And thankfully it wasn't, because I got the job. So that's really how I started working in publishing. So I started in academic publishing, but it was really brilliant experience in so many ways. And I was at CUP for a long time. for about a decade, actually, in Sydney, in Melbourne, and I ended up spending a lot of time in Cambridge and New York, not in my first year as a publishing assistant, but more towards the end. So yeah, I really learned a lot.
Mm. And we might circle back around to your academic press experience in a tick. But Jasmine from our audience asks, how did you make your way to your current job as editor for Openbook at the State Library?
Well, we're leaping forward 30
Yeah.
years, really. So after CUP, I worked at New South, UNSW Press, for about, well, I know exactly how long it was. It was 18 years. So I did along the way, have maternity leave, but basically I was working in publishing for a very long time, in book publishing for almost 3 decades. I'm sorry, this is going to be quite a long answer to how I became the editor of Openbook. But I don't know, something crept up on me in about 2015, and I had an idea for a book, and I had never seen myself as a writer ever. I'd written a few things, but I saw myself as a reader. But in 2015, I felt like something really interesting was happening with copyright, which sounds like the most boring thing ever. But it was when all the platforms, whether it was Google or Apple Music or Netflix, just seemed to be producing or aggregating unbelievable amounts of content, and the creators weren't getting credit, let alone paid for it. And I thought, we hear a lot about copyright regulation, laws, but I really wanted to get the creators' perspective about how that whole world had changed. And I had a bit of a moment where I thought I could do this myself, rather than commissioning someone to put a book together about it. I thought, I'm really interested in this. I've got good connections. I want to pursue that. So that was the first book I'd done that had my name on the front as editor, not as author. And I got the writing bug. And so then I wrote the other 2 books that you mentioned, but the first book, The Year Everything Changed, which is a kind of biography, personal and global, about the year 2001, somehow I wrote while I was working full time. I have just got no idea. I mean, I had long service leave, so, I cobbled together all kinds of bits and pieces, but I've got no idea how I did it. I didn't sleep very much. I don't know. It was really hard, and so, but very gratifying, because obviously I decided I wanted to write another book, but thought, I am not doing that while I'm working. So I made this momentous decision to resign from New South, and I put in my resignation in January 2020. So you'll all remember what happened at the start of 2020. So I spent basically the last 3 or 4 months of that job telling authors that we were going to be delaying publication of their books because of COVID, not seeing my colleagues to whom I was very close in real life. Like, the whole thing was just really weird and unsettling and upsetting, as it was for everyone. But it was, when I finally did stop working, it was fantastic for writing a book, because I really did nothing else. We were, often in lockdown. So I just sat at this very spot for a year and wrote Skin Deep. And in around July 2021, when I had delivered the manuscript to Meredith Curnow at Penguin Random House, I thought, what am I going to do? Do I want to be a freelance writer? And I was thinking, yeah, that would be good, even though I was quite realistic about how little it paid. And then out of the blue, I got a call asking if I would like to fill in as the editor of Openbook at the State Library. And I confessed then and there that I hadn't heard of Openbook, which was a bit embarrassing, but kind of understandable because it too launched with exquisitely bad timing at the start of 2020. And I hadn't been into the State Library because, you know, for a lot of the time it wasn't opened. So that's how I got the job as Openbook editor. And it was supposed to be a 1-year contract, but I'm still there.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Longest answer in history.
No, that's perfect. You've, created the journey for us, which is excellent. So what was that like after, several decades, as you've said, working in books, moving into working in magazines where I guess you're dealing with much, obviously, shorter pieces of writing, but also shorter timeframes and a faster turnover?
It was, at first it was really challenging because and still is actually. It's a great job. I love the job, but magazine, I always thought book publishing was relentless. Magazine publishing is relentless because that next issue, it comes around really quickly. And it is 100 pages of original material commissioned and edited by me every 3 months. Like it's a lot, although now I have got an offsider who helps me, particularly with the editing, because I'm an okay copy editor, but it's not what I'd done. I'd been commissioning in publishing forever. So just the kind of the organization and logistics of pulling it all together have been challenging, but in a really interesting way. I think the big thing, so I mean, I can talk a lot about this, but there are two things I'll home in on. Doing this magazine, I don't know if people know it, but I'm going to hold it up. It's a large format, glossy magazine that goes to, friends of the library and others. It's got a ton of contemporary photography, but I had done quite a few illustrated books, but in general, I published narrative nonfiction. And all of a sudden, with every article, I have to think, how are we going to illustrate this? What do we have? And of course, at the State Library of New South Wales, the collection is so vast that there is so much potential all the time to, something will be there that will be great to illustrate the article, but not all the images in the magazine are from the collection. Some come from elsewhere. But it means that I think the question I have asked most, probably about 1 million times since I started working at the library in August 2021, is, has it been digitized? Because not everything in the collection, of course, has been digitized because it's so vast. So by way of example, yesterday I spent half a day in the studio with my colleagues organizing for material from PL Travers' papers to be just a few select things. They're vast. So she's the author of Mary Poppins. and it's the 60th anniversary this year of the film of Mary Poppins, and the library has her papers and all this amazing stuff about the screenplay of the film and the casting and the imagery, and it's just gold. So we had to get that digitized. I was organizing to get quite a few images and whole magazines from Pix magazine digitized. Some people in the audience will have grown up with the ABC radio singing primary school 1 hour a week. I'm assuming people remember that. I commissioned an article about that. So we're digitizing the front of those books. So it's really random stuff. And the whole thing has made me think much more visually. I think it shifted something in my brain. I'd looked at a million, obviously not a million, but probably thousands of cover roughs and design templates over the years. So that was all really, really useful background. But I am definitely thinking much more visually. So that's probably been good for my brain. So the visual thing is one part of it. The other thing I would say is that for the first time since I became a commissioning editor, I've had to worry much less about money, how much it costs to print something, how many we're going to sell, what the margin is. And that frees up a lot of brain space, let me tell you. I mean, not that we're not concerned about costs. Of course we are. But the pressures in a public institution are different.
That's fascinating.
Mm.
Can you talk us through? I'm amazed for a start that it was just you, and now it is just you and one other person doing all of that editorial work. That's kind of remarkable.
Yeah.
So can you talk us through the process when you're coming to put together your next issue, and you start with a blank page, I suppose? Like, how do you go about pulling everything together? Because there are so many pieces. There's that visual element. There are all different types of written work, from, you know, letters to nonfiction to fiction to poetry. How do you do that?
Okay, so I'm in everything for the summer issue is now with the designer. With one exception, the photo essay, which I have been putting together and writing some text for this morning. So now I'm really thinking about the autumn issue, and a lot of that has been commissioned, and winter and summer 2025. And the good thing about being a book publisher is that you do have really long lead time. So I'm used to thinking about that. You know, if publishers now, we're in October 24, they will have their 2025 program completely locked in, and conversations about, well, what are our big books for 2026? What are we doing for Christmas 26 will be happening. And I think for some of my colleagues at the library, me coming in and saying, well, I would like to know what we're doing for Christmas 2025 has been a bit of a revelation, because in general, their lead times haven't been so long. But because the magazine has so many regular features, so there's always a poem. So I try and commission or, you know, lock in a poem in advance. There's always a short story. There is always what we call a self-portrait, which is where we get a writer to reflect on a kind of turning moment in their, or turning point in their creative life. There's the library that made me, where someone talks about a formative library. There's a photo essay. So there are all these regular things. I try and come up with a loose theme for each issue. So the theme for summer is music. and that informs some of the regular features. There are exhibitions, so often I will commission an essay to coincide with an exhibition. I've always got ideas for trends in publishing or reading or, any form of creativity. So I try and commission essays in advance. So for example, at the moment, I'm thinking about who might write something on translation, like books in translation, and that will be for later in the year. But quite a few months ago, I commissioned Sam Twyford-Moore to write an essay about book clubs, and that will be in the December issue. So I've got these spreadsheets that I set up for each issue, and I drop things in, and it's not very high tech, but I have, blocks highlighted, and they're very often gaps. And I'll be thinking, okay, I'm 6 pages short. What am I going to do? People run late. I publish, I commission freelance writers who the library pays, so that makes my job easier. We pay $1 a word, but I want to work with a lot of library staff to get them writing. Some are very confident, competent writers, very experienced. Some are very nervous. They haven't written before, haven't seen their byline, their name in print. And I'm trying to get every division, every branch of the library involved in the magazine somehow. And often book reviews are a good way to do that. So we have in each issue, although for the summer issue it's going to be bumper, but we run 5 reviews in each issue, and often there's a long review but short review. So I try and get people who are readers, who work in the library and passionate about books, new fiction, non-fiction, graphic novels, whatever it might be, poetry. I say, you can write 150 words. So I mentor a lot of people. But yeah, it can be a bit hairy where I think, oh, we're a bit short or we're a bit over, but it seems to work out.
Mm. And so, Pip, do you, we've got lots of questions coming in from the audience, as you can imagine, about whether they can pitch for Openbook, how that whole process works. Obviously, as you've said, you're reaching out to people a lot.
Yes.
And there are also some questions about whether you have, like Catherine, for example, asked, do you have much scope to adopt your own style of editorial? Like it sounds like you really do, but maybe you could talk about that a little bit as well.
I'm making it sound like I'm a complete lone wolf. I do have a lot of autonomy, which I really like, but I do try and keep everyone and by everyone, I mean my colleagues, in the loop. There's an editorial committee, and, we have a meeting where I talk through one of these spreadsheets, and I'll say, to use Sam as an example again, I'm really keen to commission something about book clubs. I think Sam would be perfect. And, everyone said yes. So there's, I guess, people are getting to know me now, trust me. The response to the magazine has been really positive. But it's very collaborative. And what I absolutely love is that now I'm getting more and more pictures from inside the library. So it is supposed to be an outward-looking general interest magazine, and it's very much that. But I want the library and the extraordinary collection to be a kind of launch pad, whether it's about a specific acquisition or object manuscript, whatever it might be in the collection. Or, you know, if my colleagues in public programs have invited, you know, young writers, or there's a poetry slam, or there's a conversation, often I will try and tie that into the magazine, so that there are kind of layers of connection and the magazine becomes part of a literary ecology.
Yeah. And so you obviously really appreciate those pictures from inside the library. What about pictures externally? Is there any opportunity for that, or anything that you would kind of recommend to the writers watching today?
Yes, there is opportunity for that. Having worked in book publishing for years, when I started, I expected to be deluged with pictures. But I think, like me, many people just didn't know about the magazine. So my advice to anyone who wants to pitch is to have a good look at the magazine. So, you know, people can become friends of the library and then it will just be sent to them. But the magazine goes to every public library in New South Wales. So you should be able to find it in your local library. And if they don't have it, ask for it. I would love for it to be, you know, prominently displayed on the shelves of public libraries. My email is in there. If you think, yeah, I can see my work in this magazine, send me an email. I'm always up for that. I'm really busy. You know, you won't always get a prompt response. So if you don't chase me, like this week, I was saying to you, Sophie, I'd been at Varuna last week trying to do some of my own work, but I got back and basically I had to pull the whole magazine together for the designer in 2 days. So emails did not get answered at all, you know, and they accumulate. So we're all in a kind of, I don't know, anxiety around responding to emails quite often. But the other thing I would say to people who think they might like to pitch is think if there's any connection to the library. So, for example, someone pitched me something a while ago. She is now a freelance journalist, and I met her because we were doing a profile of an artist, and she had a kind of connection. So she was really helpful. So I was well disposed towards her anyway, but she came to a few friends' functions at the library. So I met her. And then she said, I would really like to write something about sandstone buildings in Sydney, and how they're conserved and restored and what they're used for. And she preempted what I was going to ask and said, of course, I'll have something about the State Library, but it will also be about the National Art School and, you know, any number of other sandstone buildings. And we've got an architecture issue coming up. So it was just one of those serendipitous moments, but her pitch was really smart because she said it will include the Mitchell building of the library. So, you know, that made me feel predisposed. So like any kind of pitching, and I've been on the other side of this too. You know, I pitched stuff to the Monthly recently, a few months ago, and I'm a subscriber to the Monthly. So I was saying, well, this thing could be for the front part of the magazine, and you know, it ended up in the September issue. I wrote about Margaret Fulton. And I pitched something else and I said, that would be much longer. It would be like the essay you did about blah, blah, blah. Like editors are really busy. And you just sometimes want someone to have done a little bit of your thinking for you, you know, so that you're not having to put all your energy into thinking, how would this fit? You're engaging more with the idea.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such helpful feedback.
Yeah.
We've also had some questions come in about pitching to university presses, and it is something that, as I said, I wanted to come back to.
Yes.
Maybe to start, I read a comment from you somewhere where you said, now I've just lost it, that university presses have a unique place in the publishing landscape. And I think that's so true.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering if you can talk a little bit about that, because sometimes, you know, the work of university presses isn't always as well known as the work of trade publishers.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, one really interesting thing that happened with university presses in the course of my career is that they became like trade publishers. So, you know, if you think about UQP, that has, so University of Queensland Press, for anyone who doesn't know, they have been absolute trailblazers for decades in publishing Australian fiction, taking risks, their commitment to Indigenous writing in Australia, I think is unique and unparalleled, including poetry, you know, which is another rarity. So they're unique, but you know, the other university presses I know best are obviously New South UNSW Press and MUP. And, you know, everything goes through cycles. So when Louise Adler was head of Melbourne University Press, they looked like a trade publisher. Now they look more like an academic publisher because there was a different vice chancellor who couldn't understand why MUP, you know, probably wasn't more like some of the more traditional specialist academic publishers. But presses like New South UNSW Press have managed to do both. So the New South imprint was quite tradey, whereas UNSW Press was much more specialised and scholarly. And if you look at the authors in the New South list, not all of them have PhDs, whereas probably under the UNSW Press list, nearly all of them would have PhDs because their work is coming from within the academy. So again, to anyone thinking about this, particularly if you're not trying to, you know, get academic work published for specialized audiences in anthropology or the biological sciences or theoretical physics, you know, if you're a general writer trying to get something for a general audience published, do your research because academic presses, I think, you know, could well be interested. And I mean, I'm a bit out of this world now, but I should also mention Monash University Publishing. La Trobe University Publishing is part of Black Ink, but they have more of an academic emphasis. But, you know, the biography that they published of Donald Horne by Ryan Kropp just won the National Biography Award. So, you know, the academic presses are, you know, pretty, I would say pretty big players, as are, you know, a lot of the more independent, often experimental, risk-taking presses. You know, think of Giramondo, which is kind of attached to a university. You wouldn't call it an academic press, but no one else is really publishing stuff like they are. So yeah, it's a really varied landscape, I think. But a lot of the American university presses were often surprised by the kinds of books that we did because they were quite tradey. But, you know, a lot of American university presses have gone in that direction too. My first employee, CUP, has not. It's, you know, in Australia, we went, you know, down a bit more, you know, general reader path for a while, but the impression I get now is that it's very hardcore, scholarly kind of stuff and English language teaching.
Mm-hmm. And so perhaps a silly question, and it's from me, so not casting aspersions on anyone in the audience, but if you are talking, if you have a piece of academic writing, so not the trade stuff that university press is publishing, but actually an academic piece, do you have to be part of the academy of that university to apply to submit your work to be published by that press? Is that how it works?
No.
Okay.
No, you don't. And it used to drive me crazy when I was at parties and people, you know, back when I was working for New South, people would say, oh, you're in publishing, who do you work for? And I would tell them and they'd go, oh, right. So that means you publish textbooks by UNSW academics. And I would say, no, number one, we don't publish textbooks. We leave that to the, you know, Cengage and, you know, and even, well, that's a completely different story. But every academic press has their strengths. You know, when I was there, I published a lot of Australian history. So I wanted to publish the best Australian history wherever it came from, whether it was from another university or an independent researcher or a journalist, you know, it didn't matter. I just wanted it to be properly researched and well written.
And so is there anything that writers should know if they're going to submit their work to a university press? Is there anything different about the submission process there?
It would vary from press to press, and you know, the general rule applies. Do your research, go on their website, see what their submissions guidelines are. You know, Allen and Unwin publish quite a lot of academic, you know, particularly in Australian history, but it's written by, you know, scholars from the academy, but aimed at a general audience. And some of that would be agented, some of it wouldn't. You know, there are lots and lots of different paths, but the key message is to do your research and to have a very good sense of what that publisher is doing, what their strengths are, because that will give you a sense of whether your work might fit into their list.
Great. Okay. So Pip, we've talked a bit about your work with Openbook and your work as a publisher, and you've talked a tiny bit about your work as a writer yourself. But I was just wondering, like, what did you learn about the industry as someone who had already been in it for a while when you came to publish your own books? Like, what was that like being on the other side?
It is such a good question. A lot of stuff I already knew, like deadlines matter. So I really tried to stick to deadlines, which was very stressful, but it's important. The one big revelation was that writing is really fun. So for 25 years or more, I had people say to me, oh, writing is so hard. It's such agony. It's torture. My life is hell. I can't do it. And, you know, sometimes I would think, well, if it's so bad, why are you doing it? Why have you gone down this path? But when I started writing myself, I don't want to sound all Pollyanna-ish about it. It is hard work. You know, like I had moments where I was just so full of self-doubt and confusion and, you know, just a kind of generalized anxiety. That is not fun. But my God, when it works, when you're having a good day, it is the best. And I don't think people talk about this enough, that like it's really good. And people would go, oh, it's so hard. And I would just think, compared to what? Like sitting in meetings all day, agonizing over spreadsheets, being a childcare worker, being a nurse, like that is hard. Sitting at your desk with your own thoughts and, just this kind of sea of possibility, that's pretty great. So that was a revelation to me that I've managed to hold on to, even when it's not working. You've just got to think, I will have a better day. Things will flow better. And one other thing that I really learned was that I had been, with my own authors, completely disingenuous about publicity for years and years. I felt like going on an apology tour to every single author I had published and said, it's really hard. Like I used to blithely say, oh, it's just a 5-minute interview and then you've got your day back, not realizing that the night before, you're thinking, oh my God, I've got that interview with, the ABC. And this is assuming you're lucky enough to get, interviews in any context. And then, your publicist says, all right, you need to be on the line at 5 to 10. And then they'll talk to you after the news at 5 past 10, just say. And so like you've woken up at 6 o'clock going, oh my God, that interview. You think, oh, there's all this other stuff I need to do before the interview, but you can't focus because you're thinking, oh, I've got to be ready. And then you're on the phone at 5 to 10 and they say, oh, there's some earth-breaking news. We have to bump you to 10 to 11. And you're like, okay. And then there are great interviews, there are terrible interviews. And I'm quite extroverted. So, I get nervous, but not in a kind of rushing way. And I just thought, oh my God, for introverts, this is a complete nightmare. And then there's the in-person stuff. And then you've got, everyone around you going, oh, so is your book going to be extracted in the Good Weekend? Are you going to be on Conversations? Are you going to be on, I don't know, like the 7:30? And it's like, well, no. Why not? Do you have a keynote at, the Sydney Writers Festival? People just don't know how competitive that whole scene is and how hard, I reckon publicists have the hardest job in publishing. I just think, oh my God, they're working with anxious authors, they're pitching all the time. And now I'm on the other side of this, getting all these advanced copies for reviews and follow-ups. There are so many books and I've only got so much space. Yeah, publicity. That's what I really, really learned from being on the other side. It's really hard.
That's so refreshing to hear. It's great to hear that honesty. And I think it's so true. If there's one part of the industry that's kind of, really tough and almost cutthroat in a way, it is publicity. Like it's, poor publicists, they're doing such a tough job, like you said, and so many demands in terms of scheduling and so on, and just it being so competitive. So
yeah, and they've got to be positive all the time about everything. And like when they, like with big authors, when they go on tour, like it's nearly always young women, and because people burn out. And I just think, oh, hats off to you. This is really hard work, like another signing table, another, it's part of the job, but And, maybe in some way it seems glamorous. Occasionally, I guess it could be, but it's just really hard work and follow up.
Yeah. No, that's very refreshing.
Yeah.
So thank you to everyone. There's tons of great questions coming in. We've got time for a couple more, I think. So Tamara asks, in terms of your own writing, how did you develop your skills? What formal training or informal craft work did you do to become publishable?
I worked for 30 years as a publisher, reading other people's stuff and thinking about how to make it better.
Was it hard to kind of look at your work with clear eyes? The clear eyes that I know you have as an editor?
Yes, it was. So I really value second opinions, as hard as they can be to hear. But I did know how to structure a book. Really, Sophie, I just couldn't even count how many books I published, but hundreds. So, you pick up a few skills along the way. So yeah, I haven't done any formal courses, but the best thing you can do apart from being a publisher 7 days a week for 25 years, is to read. And if you read something that you think, wow, that is really good, read it again and take it apart and try and work out how the hell they did it. If you read a sentence that you really love, write it down. So yeah, that's how I learned to do it.
Yeah. I keep mentioning this, but we have a course coming up with Belinda Castles, who...
Oh, she's fab.
She's awesome.
Do that course.
Yeah.
Everyone, she's the best.
And she does exactly that. Like, she helps people to read as a writer and to take apart, work so that then you can put something together yourself. And it's such an undeveloped skill, I think.
Yeah, it really is. And, I know people say, oh, I'm writing, I don't want to read other stuff in case it influences me. I mean, when I was writing the 2001 book, I really got into that because a lot of that was really hard. I was writing about a personal tragedy. I was writing about 9/11. I was writing about Tampa. Like, there was a lot of pretty full-on stuff. And so I read kind of the same book at night while I was doing all that hard stuff. And it was Annie Dillard's Pilgrim at Tinker's Creek, which is really beautiful lyrical nature writing. And I feel like it kind of, was a balm to the soul in some ways. But if that helped me write a few things with a bit more lyricism, good.
Yeah.
So yeah.
That's great. A couple of questions which relate to Openbook. So Gordon asks if there are any plans to get the magazine into Queensland libraries. And Terry has asked about the transition from hard copy to digital. And I take it that is also in reference to the magazine.
Yeah, so I'll answer the second question first. The magazine is in print, but at the end of the 3-month period, it goes online and we trickle stories out online over that period. So I am just thinking, in the current issue, there's a piece by Fiona Katauskas, the cartoonist for The Guardian, and she has written something. There's a cartoon and it's a companion to a piece that one of the curators have written about an exhibition of cartoons that's on in the library at the moment. That has been published online because the exhibition is happening, so it's content that ties in. And Fiona spoke at the launch of this issue in the library bar a couple of weeks ago at the start of September. And so we wanted to publicize the event. So a lot of it is online, one way or the other. There's a profile of the photographer Anne Zahalka in the latest issue, and Anne asked me if she could put it on her website, and I said yes, because she's got an exhibition on at the National Arts School. So a lot of it does get digitized. The Queensland Library question, the short answer is no. I mean, of course, I would love it to be in every library in Australia, and it can be, because what, any library can do is subscribe, and we'll send it to them. So whoever asked that question, if you go into, your local library and say, the State Library of New South Wales puts out this magazine called Openbook, and I think we should get it, they can do that. It's, it costs $60 a year. It's pretty cheap.
Yeah. Okay, Gordon, over to you. So Pippa, last question. Do you have a favourite piece that you have ever commissioned?
No, that would be like choosing a favourite child or something.
Yeah.
And this is being recorded. So I'm not completely crazy. But there are some pieces I have really, really loved for a whole lot of reasons. One of the first essays I commissioned for the magazine was by Karen Goldsworthy, the writer who I had published at New South. I published her book Adelaide, and she wrote about the very elusive concept of literary merit in the magazine, and wrote quite a bit about Peter Temple, the late great crime writer. And I do feel very, very fond of that. I commissioned a whole lot of pieces about swimming, including photos, and I really loved that. I'm kind of, it's a bit scattergun, because in every single issue there is stuff I just adore. I mean, Ali Cobby-Eckermann has written the iteration of The Library That Made Me in the latest issue, and she also presented it live. We did, with the Sydney Writers' Festival, a Library That Made Me gala event. And that was where I heard her piece, where she talks about, the solace that the library offered her when she was in primary school in rural South Australia, but then writes about country as a kind of library. I just find that really profound. But also on that same night, we had Anna Funder writing about the libraries, talking about the libraries that made her, and it had already appeared in an issue of the magazine, and it's very romantic. So I loved that. I do have a lot of fun commissioning The Library That Made Me. That's been one of the really, really lovely things that I've done since I started with the magazine. It just popped into my head. I read Susan Orlean's book about the Los Angeles Library. I don't know if anyone's read that. It is such a great book. Just before I was starting the job, and that the idea of, the formative role that libraries play really stayed with me. So I set this up as a regular thing. So yeah, it's been a joy commissioning that, but no, there've been really great stories, short stories, everything. It's really fun.
Mm-hmm. It
I
sounds
feel
like
very
a
lucky.
wonderful job.
Yeah, thank you. It is.
Yeah, yeah.
Me, not where I thought I'd end up.
Yeah, yeah. Libby and Blake, thank you, folks. Libby and Blake from the Writing New South Wales team, they have put loads of links to these pieces and various things that you've mentioned in the chat. So everyone, before you leave, be sure you click through on those links to read, the Karen Goldsworthy piece, for example, there. And I think that's all we have time for. So thank you so much, Pip, for joining us. It's been such
a pleasure.
Thank you. And thank you everyone else for joining us today. We will have the details of our next First Friday in our Newsbite magazine, so in our Newsbite newsletter rather, so make sure that you're signed up for that and the links to RSVP. And we have a number of great courses like Belinda Castle's one to take us through to the end of the year, as well as a talking writing panel coming up on rom-coms in a few weeks. So all of those are available through Newsbite or on our website. And so thank you everyone for joining us, and thank you again, Pip.
Thank you very much, Sophie, and thanks to everyone for listening. Good luck with your own work.